Welcome to Capernaum. This is Jesus' town. In fact, if you were to film a day in the life of Jesus, it probably would be right here. Small agricultural community, maybe 1,000, 1,500 people. In Jesus' day, we can see the remains of some of the houses, the very simple houses where people in that day lived. Stone houses, very small, but with courtyards and windows. And these were the places where people made their lives. We're standing in front of the synagogue, where in Mark chapter 1, Jesus says, or we're told that Jesus came here and he cast a demon out of a man in the synagogue here. And it was a controversial matter, as it always was when Jesus did miracles. And it probably wasn't in this synagogue. This is a later version, but probably was on the footprint of this very synagogue. The synagogue was the center of community life. It's where people studied the Torah. It's where they shared life together. Capernaum was a place where it was mostly subsistence people who just got by from fishing and farming and olives. There are olive presses here. These were very simple people, but they loved the law of God. And this is where they learned the Torah, was in a place like this. And we're told that, along with Chorazin and Bethsaida, that Capernaum was one of the places that Jesus ultimately pronounced woes upon. Which reminds us that even though Jesus was here a lot and did many things recorded in the Gospels, it reminds us that proximity to Jesus does not mean faith in Jesus. It's interesting. This synagogue was actually built, according to Luke chapter 7, by a friendly Roman centurion for the people here. And of course it was here in places like this that Jesus began to make connections with outsiders, and that was a controversial matter. And maybe that was part of the reason that some of the people here didn't believe in Jesus, that they saw his miracles but didn't respond to him. And it's a reminder to all of us today that we can be very near the places where Jesus is, and we can listen closely to his teaching perhaps, but unless we respond to it and change our lives, that we're no better than the people of Capernaum who didn't respond to his teaching in his own day.
If I could say something maybe
Steve.
on this. One of the things I like to do in Capernaum here is to look around at the houses. If you look behind us at the house we already saw, kind of a joint house, maybe a large family house here. You look on over to the left of this house and you see the sea in the background. You see first century houses. These were houses that were here when Jesus lived here and did his ministry here. And you wonder about the stories that we hear in the Gospels about the woman with the flow of blood who came and sought after Jesus and touched him here. What house did she live in this? You think about Matthew's house inviting Jesus to eat, and he was accused of eating with tax collectors and sinners. Which is Matthew's house? Which is Jairus' house, right, where Jesus raised his daughter from the dead. Where did Peter live? Most people think that Peter lived right across in a house that's now underneath this church, and where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. So again, I love to think about the real lives that were taking place in these very houses, and the very likely possibility that Jesus ate supper in many of these houses and slept in some of these houses on the hospitality of other people. Love to imagine that. It really comes to life for me. This is the exact houses that were here when Jesus walked these streets.
And that perhaps as many as 5 of Jesus' apostles came from right here in this general area. And maybe some of them lived right here, like Matthew and others. That this was a place that Jesus came and found devoted followers who responded to his call to follow me. Yet it was also a place where people saw all that, experienced his miracles, and still said no.
Yes.
Well, here we are in Capernaum. You'll notice behind me here the large structure. It's actually a church that has an observational area where you look down on some ancient ruins underneath it. And this has long been called Peter's house. Perhaps some believe the house where Peter Either Peter himself lived or Peter and his family lived. We remember the story in the Gospels of Jesus going to the home of Peter and healing his mother-in-law when she was sick. Well, that might have happened right here. Some think this might have been the house where the paralytic man was lowered through the roof, perhaps. That could have happened right here. You'll notice in the ruins that there is a large octagonal structure. That is a church that was built around what they believe to be the site of, and you can see in the interior, a fairly small house, but that would have been typical of the day. Houses, unless you were rich, and most people were not in a place like Capernaum. It was a working class town. It was a very blue collar place. Fishermen and people who raised olives, and it was an agricultural center. It was a very, very simple people, lived in very simple homes. And you notice where we are, we're just a matter of yards from the Sea of Galilee. And so this was a fishing village. And so we're not far away from the very place that people made their living. You'll notice opposite the Franciscan church and the house of Peter, a large statue honoring Peter and his importance to this town. Steve?
One of the things that you think about when you think about Capernaum is the fact, as Brent mentioned, of the fishing village. And you wonder where the boats came in and out. Actually, it's likely that Peter and the other fishermen, sons of Zebedee, went in and out of the dock that's just up the road here a little bit at a place they now call the Primacy of St. Peter, a church there. And they think they found the first century dock there. But again, if you think about the life of Capernaum, Jesus is a rabbi with his disciples here. He would walk around the town teaching, instructing his disciples, stopping to look at daily events, people in the town, and giving a lesson to his disciples and teaching them what the kingdom of God had to do with that particular event or that particular activity, and what they could learn from him on that.
And the last thing I'll say is that remember that even a place as small as Capernaum was a complicated mixture of people. Not everybody here loved Jesus. Jesus was rejected by some here, and indeed, turning back to the house of Peter, if this was the place where he healed the paralytic, we remember that this is also the place where he got in all kinds of trouble because he was the one who dared to first say, "Your sins are forgiven," and then he made him walk, and that angered his enemies who were present there. And wherever Jesus is, we remember that his enemies are never very far away. There are always those who won't accept his teachings, and that's still true today. What a great place.
Here we are at Capernaum, and one of the things that we think about in Capernaum, Brent, is Jesus as a rabbi. As I understand it, there were two kinds of teachers at Jesus' time. One was called a Torah teacher, who knew the Torah by heart, the law, who could teach eloquently and powerfully from the stories and all the principles, could make applications to daily life. And that kind of teacher would teach with a certain formula. He would say, "It's written," and then he'd quote the part of the text that he wanted to teach on. And then he would explain it with stories or analogies of different kinds. And then he would have to give a support for his teaching, that he wasn't just inventing something himself, that he would have a support from a rabbi or several rabbis that were recognized and respected by the Jewish community that affirmed what he was saying. And so that would be his pattern, the quoting, the explaining, and the support. Then there's another kind of teacher in Capernaum and in many places in the Jewish world called a rabbi with smicha, and that's the Hebrew word for authority. It's the word that we see translated in Matthew 7 at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, when it says the people were amazed at Jesus because he taught as one with smicha, with authority. And it's the same idea that we have over in Matthew chapter 21 in the last week of Jesus' life, when the Pharisees and the leaders come up to Jesus and ask him, by whose authority do you teach these things? And it's a natural question. If you're the leaders of a religion in a country, you want to make sure that the teachers are teaching with good training and with authority, and it's recognized. And so they were asking, in a sense, maybe where did you get your degrees, your graduate education, just to make sure that he was kosher in a good way. And a rabbi with smicha was all that a Torah teacher was, but even more. He probably had the whole Old Testament memorized. He could teach extensively from it. He was a powerful teacher as well. And he had this smicha. And the way that you got smicha was to be recognized that your knowledge academically was good and your life, your character was godly. But then also there'd be two other rabbis with smicha that would come and publicly set you before the congregation or before the people, the community, and say, this person has proven his knowledge of the Word and his love of God, and his character is exemplary before us. And so now we lay hands on him and pass on to him our smicha, our authority. And these kind of teachers taught a little bit differently. They would also start by quoting the text. It's written, and then they'd quote the part of the law they wanted to teach on. And then they could teach what was already accepted and known by the community. But these men had the authority also to go on and reveal new teachings, maybe a new kind of teaching from the Lord, a new interpretation of the law that hadn't been taught before. These men could do that. And so their pattern might be, it is written, you've heard that it is said, but then I say to you. And then they would introduce another wrinkle, another element. And you hear Jesus teaching a lot like that in the Sermon on the Mount numerous times. You've heard that it was said, do not murder. But I tell you that anyone who's angry with his brother and calls him a fool is liable to the fires of hell. So again, a rabbi with smicha. And you think about, well, who were Jesus's two authorities that affirmed him? And we have one in John the Baptist, who recognized that Jesus was a powerful rabbi sent directly from God. And then the other authority that affirmed Jesus was God himself, straight from heaven, when he got baptized. This is my son, whom I love. And then later on in the Transfiguration, this is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. The smicha doesn't get any better than that. And so it's amazing to think about the things that Jesus did as a respected Jewish rabbi and one of the centers of Jewish education in his time.